The 1950s was a period in which America was drastically changed. Throughout this period, African Americans fought for equality through the abolishment of Jim Crow laws, numerous court cases, and many important civil rights leaders. Our country and society evolved massively into a more accepting and equal system. Homer Plessy was a man of mixed race but labeled as black. On June of 1892, he bought a first-class train ticket and boarded a whites-only train car of the East Louisiana Railroad. After taking a seat in the car, he was asked to vacate it and sit in the blacks-only train car. Plessy refused and was arrested and taken from the train immediately. Thus became the court case of Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson was a Supreme Court case decided on May 18, 1896. This court case allowed state-sponsored segregation at public facilities. It stated that as long as the separate facilities for the separate races were equal, the segregation did not violate the 14th Amendment, which stated that no state shall deny to any person the equal protection of the laws. This case was considered a loss for the civil rights movement of America. However, this decision was not necessarily the final say. Plessy v. Ferguson was overturned by the case of Brown v. Board of Education. In 1951, a class action lawsuit was filed against the Board of Education in the city of Topeka, Kansas. The plaintiffs were 13 Topeka parents on behalf of their 20 children. The suit called for the school district to reverse its policy of racial segregation in schools. The named plaintiff, Oliver Brown, was convinced to join the lawsuit on behalf of his daughter. This third-grade girl had to walk 6 blocks just to her bus stop and then drive another mile to get to her assigned school, when there was a white school only a mere 7 blocks from her house. Finally, in May of 1954, the Supreme Court, with a unanimous vote, declared state laws establishing separate but public schools for black and white students to be unconstitutional.
Southerners assumed that if grade school kids were in a desegregated setting, they'd get to know each other and they'd get to date each other and then they'd marry each other. And that was the strongest taboo that the South held.
There was, of course, opposition to this decision, but the 14th Amendment protected these students. Jim Crow laws are, constitutionally, over. There are many laws put into place that would effectively end segregation and aid in the civil rights movement, and not only African Americans took part in this race war. President John F. Kennedy called for the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in his civil rights speech of June 11, 1963.
Denied equal rights, denied the opportunity to eat at a restaurant or a lunch counter or go to a movie theater, denied the right to a decent education, denied almost today the right to attend a state university even though qualified. It seems to me that these are matters which concern us all, not merely presidents or congressmen or governors, but every citizen of the United States. This is one country. It has become one country because all of us and all the people who came here had an equal chance to develop their talents. We cannot say to 10% of the population that you can't have that right.
This civil rights legislation would outlaw discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. It would end unequal application of voter registration requirements and desegregate facilities that serve the general public. After the assassination of the president in November of 1963, there was a fear that the act would fall through and civil rights would have to take a step back. However, when Lyndon B. Johnson became president, in his first address to a joint session of Congress, he told legislators, "No memorial, oration, or eulogy could more eloquently honor President Kennedy's memory than the earliest possible passage of the Civil Rights Bill for which he fought so long." Thus, the bill was signed into law by President Johnson on July 2nd of 1962. There are many people who were involved as leaders in the civil rights movement. One of the most known and famous ones is Martin Luther King, Jr. Martin Luther King, Jr. was an American Baptist minister, activist, humanitarian, and leader in the African American civil rights movement. He is best known for his role in the advancement of civil rights using nonviolent civil disobedience, which he studied from Mahatma Gandhi in his nonviolent protests. He led many protests and became a national figure and best known spokesman of the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks is another influential face of the civil rights movement. The United States Congress called her the First Lady of Civil Rights and the Mother of the Freedom Movement. She became an international icon of the resistance to racial segregation and an activist in the NAACP. Parks is most known for refusing to obey the orders of a bus driver to give up her seat in the colored section to a white person once the white section was filled. She was promptly arrested, which sparked the Montgomery bus boycott of 1955. The Montgomery bus boycott was a political and social protest campaign against the policy of racial segregation on the public transit system of Montgomery, Alabama. For 385 days, African American citizens refused to ride the bus. This caused such a loss in profits for the city of Montgomery, Alabama, that the case of Browder v. Gale was initiated. On June 5, 1956, the court ruled that bus segregation was unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment protection for equal treatment. This was another win for the civil rights movement. The 18 to 1900s was not only a time for African American accomplishments. Women began to have a broader voice too. Through conventions, protests, and demand for amendments, they were able to assimilate themselves into more important roles in our community and society. Beginning as early as the mid-1800s, women started to believe that they deserved more rights. The first Women's Rights Convention was held in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York. There, women and men outlined grievances and an agenda for the women's rights movement. In 1919, the Federal Women's Suffrage Amendment, written by Susan B. Anthony in 1878, is finally passed by the House of Representatives and the Senate and sent to the states for ratification. In 1920, the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution, which allowed women the right to vote. Another accomplishment for women's rights was the Equal Pay Act of 1963. This Equal Pay Act is a United States federal law that amended the Fair Labor Standards Act and aimed to abolish the wage difference based on sex. It was signed into law on June 10th by President John F. Kennedy. This was a huge stepping stone of equal rights for women and a start to be seen as equals to men. Women are out of the shadows of the home and stepping out into the real world where their sex will not hold them back. In present day, we may still have racial and sexual discrimination issues, but it is not anywhere near as bad as the earlier times. Through leaders and protests to court cases and acts, America has become what it is today. Because people took a stand for what they believed in and what was right, today, people of all color, race, nationality, and sex have a voice. The United States is truly becoming the land of opportunity for everyone and will hopefully continue to grow that way in the future.